Peace Queen. It's Melissa Crawford of thequeencode.com, and the message today is part 4 in the series entitled Revelations, Unveiling the Great Mystery of the Divine Feminine. So in this series, I'm sharing what it really takes to restore womanhood back to its rightful place. And I've been giving you a lot of our backstory, or what I call our herstory, to really show you where we've been as women and how we fell from grace, and now we're rising again. So there's women all over the globe who are feeling that internal urge, that stirring, and queens all over are returning to their thrones. So here we are in part 4, and I actually want to come from a different angle, a different historical perspective here. So when I was in college, I was introduced in one of my history classes to this historical document called the Willie Lynch Letter. And it's all about the makings of a slave. So you have this man, Willie Lynch, who, and I actually have a small booklet on it here, but you have this man who was a slave owner, a plantation owner in the West Indies in 1712. So you're talking about at the height of the African slave trade. And he travels to Virginia here in America because they were having problems with their slaves. And so he travels to Virginia. He gives this speech that, again, later on became the Willie Lynch Letter. And he's basically telling these slave owners how to not only control and solve the problems they're having with their slaves, but also if they implement this program that he's teaching to them, then they will also regenerate slaves for hundreds of years, he says. And so even though this speech is about African slavery and black slaves, what Willie Lynch is really proposing here is really more of a spiritual, emotional, mental, psychological slavery. And so in that way, it transcends racial barriers. It's not about, being a certain color. You can be a Caucasian queen or a Latina queen or an Asian queen, Native American queen. It doesn't matter. It really is the psychological and the internal barriers that he's speaking to here that I want to draw attention to. So he starts his speech off by, introducing himself and the whole nine. And then he goes on to say, I caught the whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple of miles back. And he tells the plantation owners, you're not only losing valuable stock by hangings, but you're having uprisings, your slaves running away, your crops are not doing good. And so he goes on to tell them all these different things, all these problems, how they're losing money. And he says, but in my bag here, I have a foolproof method for controlling your black slaves. I guarantee every one of you that if installed correctly, it will control the slaves for at least 300 years. And he says, my method is very simple. He talks about how anyone in the family could use it, even children. And what he does is he goes on to outline how he uses distrust, envy, and fear as means of control. And then he talks about separating the differences, putting the men against the women, the old against the young, the light skin against the dark skin. And it's just amazing that when I was reading this back in 2003, that I could still see the effects of, what they call now the Willie Lynch syndrome. And what's even funnier is that it's in 1712, and so he talks about 300 years, which technically that would have been 2012, which, if you're so attuned, 2012 was a very pivotal year in terms of breaking some things, and we're walking more in the newness now in 2014 and beyond. But going back to that, he's using this psychological program to reproduce slaves. And did it work? Absolutely it did. Again, I saw the effects of it still going strong in 2003 when I first read this letter. But here's what I want to draw attention to as it relates to women, is that one of the reasons why it works so well, and he doesn't talk much about it here, but if you study the Willie Lynch syndrome and also a lot of different psychological programming, one of the reasons why it works so well because they knew that if they could deeply ingrain this program into women, that they would be able to regenerate that same psychology for generations. Why? Because as women, we are very much the first teacher in our powerful role as mother, whether we have physically mothered children. Many of you know that I'm pregnant now. I'm actually 9 months pregnant now. But whether we physically birth children or whether we have just been in mothering roles in other people's lives, typically we are the first influencers, and we have influence anyway as one of our natural gifts as women. But typically we're the first influencers, and typically we are the first teachers. And so one of the reasons why this psychological program works so well is because it was heavily indoctrinated into women. And what that would do again is we would teach the next generation, and the next generation would teach the next generation. And it's not that our kings are not important, but they understood how powerful our influence, our level of influence was in terms of touching directly the next generation. And so I say that to say, because here's what I don't want to do, and I actually explained this on the last video as well. It's not about pointing fingers and saying they did this to us or they did that to us, because we've been out of our power for a long time. But it's not to blame anyone else. It's really to literally unveil and to show you what's been going on behind the scenes so that we can reclaim our power back. It's not about hating a person or getting mad at a person, because that is not going to help our situation. It's not going to help us break free. It's not going to help us to transcend. It's only going to keep us low. So even though this Willie Lynch letter was in 1712, you can go back hundreds of years before that, thousands of years before that, and there's always been some type of psychological programming that's been geared mainly towards women. Men as well, don't get me wrong, because I can tell you all types of stories about that too. But again, mainly towards women. And what I want to draw attention to is, if you don't know your power, but someone else does, then it leaves you in a situation to be heavily manipulated. And so again, as women, we have this amazing power as influencers, as first teachers. We're literally stamping our imprint directly on the next generation, even for mothers, whether you were present in the home or even your absence weighs very heavily on a child. So when someone else knows your power, your innate power, but you don't, you will actually leave yourself in, wide open to not only be manipulated, but to also be running somebody else's program and you don't even know it. And so I say that to say, if we have been, if we've had these programs instituted, taught to us unconsciously, and we're able to reproduce generations that have been in bondage. I mean, we know the generational curses, things that your mother's been through, you've been through, your grandmother's been through, your aunt's been through, your sisters, whatever. We see the wave of generational curses. If we have that type of influence where we've been regenerating generations that have been in bondage, could it not work the opposite way? If we begin to wake up and understand the powerful electric magnetic energy that is woman, if we begin to understand that, could we not, instead of reproducing a generation in bondage, could we not reproduce a royal race? People ask me lots of times, with the Queen Code, well, are you thinking about possibly branching out and doing a King's Code? Or do you think about, doing this or doing that? And I love the idea of that, and I'm not opposed to it at all. One of the reasons why I specifically speak to women is because I understand that when you awaken a queen, you awaken the world. I understand the power that we have in our innate abilities as a woman. And so I'm trying to go directly to the source, because if you can awaken that woman And if all women on this planet begin to awaken and rediscover who they are and how powerful we are, could we not instill that into our children? Could we not create and reproduce a royal race? Do we need our kings for that? Absolutely. My princess, her father is very important. My husband is very important to the equation. But I'm very aware that as I'm carrying her right now, she's actually being taught by me in the womb. And again, whether you have physically birthed children or not, it's amazing the power that we have to really leave an impression on things. And so this document, this man, so many others in the past, hundreds of years before him, all the psychological constructs and the things that have kept us in bondage and kept us being slaves, no matter what color you are, kept us being slaves to a system or just, in bondage in our lives. It's time to break free of that and reclaim that power and understand that there's some things that you may be thinking that are not your own thoughts. And so it's time to deprogram and reprogram, okay? And in order for us to really get to a point of freedom, we can't teach our children what we don't already have. So it starts with us. So again, with the great unveiling, make a decision that you will no longer run somebody else's program. Make a decision that you will no longer be a battery fueling somebody else's program, okay? Tap into the power within and use that as a battery. And as you begin to awaken and influence that next generation, let's go and build this royal race. That's my message for you today. In the meantime, until we talk again, I do have a wonderful gift for you. If you go over to thequeencode.com, you can get your free audio, Reign as Queen in 2014. And you're just going to learn more about what it means right now to be a woman in this time, the awesome work that we've been called to do, the fact that we're not just, nobody's walking around without a purpose. You're a queen born for such a time as this. So all you simply have to do is go to my website at www.thequeencode.com, claim that free audio, and I'll be coming back to you next week with the next part of Revelations. Stay tuned.